But after working together on 27 films for 43 years, Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. It started with creative differences, got worse with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and ended in silence. Today, we reveal why Spielberg never forgave Ford, and the shocking reason they haven't talked since. Steven Spielberg was born on December 18, 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a Jewish family with deep Ukrainian roots. His father Arnold was an electrical engineer who worked on early computers, and his mother Leah was a concert pianist who later opened her own restaurant. Both of them came from families of Jewish immigrants who had fled Ukraine with stories of survival that would later be used in Spielberg's films. Spielberg's childhood was anything but stable because of his father's job. The family moved all the time, from Cincinnati to New Jersey to Arizona. Each move meant starting over. And he was It was hard for him because he was Jewish and lived in an area with mostly non-Jewish people. His family's Orthodox traditions made him feel ashamed, and school was even worse. Bullies called him names, threw pennies at him, and even wrote mean things on his locker. Some of his classmates would sneeze at him as they walked by, which was mean. He hated being different, and at one point he started telling people his last name was German instead of Jewish to avoid being picked on. He carried that shame for years, until he was older. Despite everything, there was one thing that made him feel alive: filmmaking. When he was 12, he borrowed his father's 8mm camera and made a short Western movie called The Last Gunfight to earn a Boy Scout photography badge. It was only supposed to be a small project, but he loved it, and by the time he was 13 he had made Escape to Nowhere, a 40-minute war movie based on stories his father told him about World War II. He didn't have any fancy gear, so he got creative and used flour-filled boards to fake explosions. The film won first place in a statewide competition, which was his first taste of fame. When he was 17, he went even bigger. He directed his first full-length movie, Firelight, a sci-fi story about alien encounters. The budget was only $500, but he made it work by using smart tricks like superimposing glowing spaceships onto the film by layer during exposures. It was rough, but the ideas were there, the kinds of stories he liked: mystery, wonder, and broken families. Before making movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg showed Firelight at a local theater and charged $1 for each ticket. At the end of the night, after selling 500 tickets, he counted the money and made a $1 profit. It wasn't much, but to Spielberg it showed that people would come to see something he had made. Steven Spielberg's path to Hollywood began with a short film he made in 1968 called Amblin. It was a 26-minute movie with no dialogue. With a small budget of $155,000, Spielberg made a simple but deeply symbolic story about a young man and woman hitchhiking through the Mojave Desert during the hippie era. The film's quiet, intimate moments slowly reveal a deeper message. The man seems like a free spirit at first, but the things in his guitar case, like a tie, deodorant, and toothpaste, show that he's not as carefree as he acts. This subtle commentary on identity and societal expectations really hit home. What's even more interesting about Amblin is how Spielberg pulled it off. He was only 21 years old when he directed it, and he chose to shoot on 35mm film, which was a risky and expensive move for someone just starting out. The movie relied on expressive cinematography and music instead of dialogue to create an emotional experience. This showed Spielberg's natural talent for telling stories through the camera alone. Amblin had an immediate impact on Sidney Sheinberg, a top executive at Universal. TV executive saw the movie and liked it so much that he offered Spielberg a 7-year directing contract. At age 22, Spielberg was the youngest director to sign a deal with a major studio. The name Amblin stuck with him, and he used it for his production company. One of his first big jobs was directing the first episode of Columbo. At the age of 24, Spielberg gave the detective show an unforgettable Hitchcock-style makeover, with creative camera angles and tense pacing. The episode became one of the most famous in the series, and showed that he could turn TV into something cinematic. But Spielberg's real big break came later that year with Duel, a made-for-TV movie based on a short story by Richard Matt that became a hit. Duel is about a traveling salesman who is being chased by an unnamed truck driver on a desolate highway. Sounds simple, but Spielberg turned it into a tense thriller by using low-angle shots to make the truck look like a huge monster, and sound design to create almost unbearable tension. Even though it was made for TV, Duel looked and felt like a full-length movie, which led to its release in theaters in Europe. The movie was a hit, earning Spielberg praise from critics and solidifying his reputation as one of Hollywood's most exciting new directors. But in 1975, Spielberg did just that with Jaws. What began as a simple thriller about a killer shark turned into a box office monster that changed the rules of filmmaking. Before Jaws, movies didn't have huge nationwide releases, and summer wasn't even thought of as a good time for movies. That all changed when Spielberg's terrifying Great White Shark hit theaters and became the first movie to ever make $100 million in the US. It didn't stop there. By the end of its run, Jaws had racked in the movie made an amazing $470 million worldwide, but here's the crazy part. It almost didn't make it. The mechanical shark kept breaking down and looked more like a floating bathtub than a bloodthirsty predator. But Spielberg didn't scrap the movie. Instead, he took a risk and barely showed the shark at all. Instead, he used suspense and music to make the audience feel its presence, and John Williams's haunting two-note theme did just that. Spielberg later compared it to Alfred Hitchcock's style, in which fear comes from what isn't shown on screen, not from what is. Beyond the scares, what made Jaws a real game-changer was how it was released. Back then, movies didn't open in hundreds of theaters all at once. Studios would test them in a few cities, then expand if they did well. But Universal did the opposite. They spent an insane $700,000 on TV ads and blasted Jaws into 409 theaters on the same day, which created instant hype, and Jaws studios made a lot of money by selling t-shirts, toys, and even swimming fins. Hollywood had found a gold mine. But Jaws did more than just make money. It changed movies forever. Before Jaws, the most popular films were character-driven, rebellious films. When Jaws studios realized that big, exciting, high-concept films could bring in huge audiences, it started a new era in Hollywood, where spectacle was just as important as story. The film won 3 Academy Awards. Spielberg had already taken over Hollywood with Jaws, but he wasn't done yet. 2 years later, he went even bigger with Aliens and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977, which was very different from other sci-fi films of the time. While most alien stories were based on Cold War fears of invasion, Spielberg's aliens were mysterious and even peaceful. Roy Neary was a normal guy whose life is turned upside down when he sees UFOs. His obsession with them grows, leading him on a journey that makes him question everything he knows. In a way, it was a reflection of Spielberg himself, who was obsessed with telling stories that made people see the world in new ways. Visually, the movie was ahead of its time, and special effects master Douglas Trumbull created breathtaking scenes, such as the unforgettable scene where the alien mothership descends glowing with. Spielberg had a brilliant plan. Instead of making it hard for humans and aliens to talk to each other, he added powerful music. John Williams composed a simple 5-note melody that served as a universal language between the two species, similar to the two-note terror in Jaws. This melody became instantly famous, and the movie had real emotional weight. Roy Neary's journey wasn't just about aliens. It was about obsession, discovery, and the unknown. Years later, Spielberg said that he would have written Roy differently if he had been a father at the time, because in the movie Roy leaves his family to go after the aliens. That was Spielberg at age 30, driven by curiosity. Years later, when he was a father himself, he saw things differently. Close Encounters came out the same year as Star Wars and proved that sci-fi could be both smart and hugely popular. It made over $300 million and earned Spielberg his first Oscar nomination for Best Director. It had great cinematography and paved the way for even better sci-fi films, like Spielberg's E.T. A few years later, in 1977, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were relaxing on a beach in Hawaii. Lucas had just released Star Wars, and Spielberg was dreaming of directing a James Bond movie. But Lucas had a better idea. He wanted to make a movie about a swashbuckling archaeologist named Indiana Smith. Spielberg liked the idea, but thought Smith sounded too plain, so he suggested calling him Indian. Once the name was decided, the real challenge was to write a story around this daring character. Lucas, Spielberg, and Lawrence Kasdan worked together to bring Indiana Jones to life. They wanted the movie to feel like the old action serials from the 1930s and 1940s. Fast-paced, dangerous, and full of adventure. That's when filmmaker Philip Kaufman suggested the Ark of the Covenant as the perfect treasure for Indy's first quest. By 1980, everything was ready for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Not much was known about who would play Indiana Jones. The first choice wasn't Harrison Ford, but Tom Selleck. Selleck even got the part, but just as things were coming together, Selleck had to back out because he had to work on the TV show Magnum P.I. Suddenly, they needed a new Indiana Jones. Spielberg thought of Ford right away, but Lucas wasn't sure he wanted Ford to become his go-to guy after casting him as Han Solo in Star Wars. In the end, Ford got the part, promising to make Indy his. Ford had one of his most famous moments on set in Tunisia. The script called for a fierce fight scene between Indiana and a master swordsman, but Ford was sick with dengue and too tired for the long choreographed scene. Frustrated, he turned to Spielberg and said, "Why don't I just shoot the guy?" Spielberg laughed and agreed, and the result was one of the funniest and most famous scenes in movie history. Ford wasn't just playing Indiana Jones, Spielberg gave him life. Trusted Spielberg to shape the character, and when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in theaters on June 12, 1981, it was an instant hit. People couldn't get enough of it, and it made $389 million worldwide, proving that adventure films were still going strong. Steven Spielberg directed all 4 original Indiana Jones films: Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Each had a different tone. Raiders of the Lost Ark set the standard for adventure. The Last Crusade made things more fun by adding Indy's father, played by Sean Connery, and focusing on their troubled relationship. Spielberg saw it as a story about fathers and sons, which made it more than just another action movie. By the time Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came around, Spielberg wasn't even sure he wanted to do it. He only agreed out of loyalty to Lucas and love for the character. But Spielberg wasn't the only one who created Indiana Jones. Harrison Ford also played Indy. At first, Ford wasn't sure if he wanted to play the part, because he thought the character might feel too much like Han Solo. So he worked with Spielberg and Lucas to make Indy smarter, more rugged, and most importantly, human. Ford didn't want Indy to be an untouchable hero. He wanted him to struggle, get hurt, and think his way out of problems instead of just fighting his way through them. Ford insisted on playing an aging Indy and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull exactly as he was gray. To show that even older heroes can still have adventures, Spielberg put a lot of faith in Ford and let him do many of his own stunts. This trust came at a cost though. Ford got hurt a lot in Raiders. A plane ran over his leg and tore his ACL in Temple of Doom, and he hurt his back so badly that he needed surgery, but he wouldn't let a stunt double take over the bruises and limping. That was all real, and it made Indy feel. Behind the scenes, things didn't always go smoothly. One of the biggest fights happened during Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. George Lucas was set on including aliens in the story, but Ford and Spielberg weren't happy. Ford even told Lucas, "No way am I being in a Steven Spielberg movie like that." Spielberg wasn't sure either, since he had already made E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but Lucas wouldn't give up. In the end, they made the aliens part of an ancient myth instead of little green men from space. Even though the story was controversial, Spielberg had done his part by making it feel like an Indiana Jones movie. Harrison Ford isn't just Harrison Ford or Han Solo, he's also the reason E.T. the Extraterrestrial happened the way it did, and most people don't even know it. In 1980, Steven Spielberg was in Tunisia filming Raiders of the Lost Ark when he had another story in his head about a lost alien and a lonely planet. Unfortunately, he didn't have a script. Luckily, Ford's girlfriend at the time, Melissa Matt, was on set. She was a talented screenwriter who was best known for writing The Black Stallion. Spielberg saw an opportunity and pitched E.T. to her in the hopes that she would write the script, but she turned him down because writing was too hard for her. Spielberg wasn't one to give up, so he turned to Ford and asked for help. Ford knew how much Spielberg believed in him, so Spielberg pitched the idea again, this time with more heart and emotion, and it worked right there in the Tunisian desert. Matt changed her mind, and that decision led to one of the most famous scripts in Hollywood history. She captured Spielberg's vision perfectly, and her work earned her an Oscar nomination. Without Ford, E.T. might not have been made, but Ford's involvement didn't end there. He even had a scene in the movie, but you've never seen it. Ford, Elliot's school principal, gives him a serious lecture about responsibility while Elliot floats in his chair thanks to his psychic connection. But there's a twist. Spielberg didn't show Ford's face because he wanted the story to be told from a kid's point of view, and adults should just be background noise. After all that, the scene was cut because Spielberg thought it slowed down the movie too much, so even one of Hollywood's biggest stars couldn't get out of the editing room. Footage stayed hidden for years and only came out in special releases for Henry Thomas, the young actor who played Elliot and Ford on set. It was unforgettable. In the 1990s, Steven Spielberg was unstoppable. He ruled both special effects and deep emotional storytelling, showing that a director could master both. It all began with Jurassic Park. In 1993, Spielberg took a huge risk by using computer-generated imagery, CGI, for the first time. He didn't just use CGI though. He mixed it with animatronics to make the dinosaurs look real enough to scare people. For example, the T-Rex attack scene was a mix of a 9,000-pound animatronic and CGI, blended so well that people couldn't tell the difference. It wasn't easy. Rendering a single frame of the T-Rex in the rain took 6 hours, but it paid off. The movie broke records as the highest-grossing movie of all time and won 3 Oscars for sound and visual effects. A few months later, Spielberg released Schindler's List instead of CGI and adventure. It was one of the darkest true stories ever told, and it was shot in black and white. The movie was about Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who saved over 1,100 Jewish lives during the Holocaust. Spielberg filmed on location in Kofh, Holland, and it broke his heart, but the result was undeniable. It made $322 million worldwide, won 7 Oscars, and was Spielberg's first Best Picture win. Finally got recognized as one of the best directors of all time with Director's Cut in 1998. By the end of the decade, he had returned to war with Saving Private Ryan, whose opening D-Day scene was so realistic that real veterans had flashbacks while watching it. Spielberg used handheld cameras, drained the color, and threw away traditional Hollywood heroics. The movie followed Captain John Miller and his squad as they looked for Private James Ryan, the last surviving brother of a... Based on the real-life Nyland brothers, Steven Spielberg made sure that everything was correct by putting actors through tough boot camp training and consulting historians at every stage. The movie was a huge hit, making $482 million worldwide, and Spielberg won Best Director again. Steven Spielberg started the 2000s by exploring science fiction, but not just flashy futuristic action. He also went deep into human emotion and AI, artificial intelligence. Stanley Kubrick had planned for 200W to be his idea. Years, but he didn't think the technology was ready. In 1995 he gave it to Spielberg, and after Kubrick's death in 1999, Spielberg made it his own. The movie was about David, an android programmed to love, and it asked what it meant to be human. By combining Kubrick's dark vision with his own emotional storytelling, Spielberg made a movie that divided audiences. It made $236 million worldwide, got 2 Oscar nominations, and over time became known as one of his most ambitious projects. Then came Minority Report 2002, based on Philip K. Dick's Nala, wasn't just another sci-fi movie. It explored the idea of free will versus fate in a future where crimes are prevented before they happen. Tom Cruise's character John Anderton is accused of a murder he hasn't committed yet. Spielberg didn't just make an exciting chase movie, he brought in scientists to help him make the future seem real. The movie made $358 million worldwide, showing that Spielberg could make thought-provoking sci-fi a hit. But he wasn't done yet. He wasn't just good at making films about futuristic worlds, he could also do heavy damage with real events. For example, Munich 2005 was about Israel's secret mission to kill the people responsible for the 1972 Olympics massacre. Instead of glorifying revenge, Spielberg focused on how it affected people's morals and the never-ending cycle of violence. The movie caused controversy and earned 5 Oscar nominations, but it only made $131 million worldwide. Years later, Lincoln 2012 was about Abra. Instead of a broad biography, Spielberg focused on Lincoln's political battles to pass the 13th Amendment. Daniel D. Lewis played Lincoln so well that he won an Oscar, and the movie got 12 nominations and over $275 million, showing that a slow, dialogue-heavy drama could still captivate audiences. He wasn't done with history yet. Bridge of Spies, 2015, brought Cold War tensions to life by following an insurance lawyer named James B. Donovan as he negotiates a spy exchange between the US and the Soviet Union, which was sharp, subtle, and intense. It got 6 Oscar nominations, and Mark Rylance won Best Supporting Actor for his role as a Soviet spy. Then, in 2017, Spielberg made The Post, which starred Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, and was about the Pentagon Papers scandal. It wasn't just about history, though, it was also about power, corruption, and press freedom. Spielberg rushed the movie into production in 9 months to make sure it came out at a politically relevant time. It was nominated for Best Picture and made $79 million, showing that he could still hit a nerve. Then, just when it looked like Spielberg might stick to serious dramas, he jumped back into the world of spectacle with Ready Player One. Set in a dystopian future where people escape into virtual reality, the movie was a love letter to pop culture games and adventures. It was full of references from The Shining to Back to the Future, and critics thought it was all flash and no substance, but audiences loved it, and it made $67 million worldwide. Then came something more personal, The Fans 2022, in which Spielberg told his own story about his childhood, his love of films, and the problems his family was having. The movie didn't do very well at the box office, earning only $45,600,000, but it hit close to home for Spielberg. It won the People's Choice Award at the Toronto International Film Festival and was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. It was Spielberg at his most honest and personal, showing that even after death. His first marriage to actress Amy Irving in 1985 didn't last long. They had a son named Max, but they got divorced in 1989, and Spielberg had to pay a huge $100 million settlement, which was one of the biggest at the time. A few years later, he met actress Kate Capshaw while working on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. They got married in 1991 and have been together for over 30 years. Capshaw already had 2 kids from a previous relationship. Spielberg had 4 more children with Jessica: Theo, Michaela, who was adopted, and Desi. Before E.T., Spielberg wasn't sure he wanted to be a dad, but after making the movie he changed his mind. He once said that directing and parenting felt the same. They were both about guiding and shaping something bigger than yourself. No matter how busy he was, family always came first. His wife Kate even quit acting to focus on their home, calling their marriage a partnership. Spielberg was in charge of the camera and the story. Spielberg felt he had to do more than just make films about history. He wanted to preserve it. In 1994, he started the USC Shoah Foundation to record testimonies from Holocaust survivors. At first, the foundation only recorded testimonies from Holocaust survivors, but it later added testimonies from survivors of genocides in Rwanda, Armenia, and Cambodia. The foundation has now recorded over 5,600 testimonies from survivors in 44 languages and 65 countries. Spielberg thinks he wants these stories to show future generations what hate can do. The foundation also fights racism and anti-Semitism. But that wasn't the only way he gave back. He used the money he made from Schindler's List to start the Righteous Persons Foundation, which has given over $100 million to Jewish culture and social justice causes. He also started the Wound Kinder Foundation, which funds projects in education, healthcare, the arts, and disaster relief. He gave $30 million to help the struggling film industry. Spielberg and his wife gave $1 million to help people in need after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. They also helped Hurricane Katrina victims get medical care and started the Starlight Children's Foundation to bring joy to sick kids.